From Corpus Christi School in grade 6. My question is, how do you wash your hands with soap and water in space?
How do we wash our hands? Nicholas, I brought something to answer your question. Look closely at the camera. You can see this. It is no rinse body bath. No rinse body bath. And it's a bag with a straw. So now let's demonstrate. Okay, it's time to get clean. I'm going to squirt some water out. So we have a big ball of water, and you put it on your hand. And now I've got water floating around on my hand. And so I'd wash my hands up with that. And then grab a towel. And dry them off. So that's how we do it. We use no rinse. It's a special type of slightly soapy water, so you don't need to have a bunch of fresh water afterwards. You squirt it, you float a ball of water in front of yourself, and then you just dry your towel. And when you're done, we just tuck our towel somewhere to let it air dry so that the evaporated water gets back into the space station and we can use that water again. So it works pretty well. Sort of like, maybe sort of like if you were on a sailboat and you needed to get clean, you do it sort of the same way.
The first Canadian to walk in space, astronaut Chris Hadfield joins me to discuss the current space race, along with how China's National Space Administration works in peace with NASA and the European Space Agency, and how they do this successfully when countries are at odds, along with how technology can be the equalizer of all of it. Join us as we get rebelliously curious. Thanks for joining us on Rebelliously Curious with Chrissy Newton. Before we get started, I want to tell you a story that I have a little bit about what's happened to me when I actually saw you. And I didn't get to meet you though, and it's unfortunate, but now I get to talk to you, which is really great. So as I'm based in Toronto, Canada, and I was at the Sky Dome. Well, I still like to call it the Sky Dome because that's the name that I'll stick with, not the Rogers Center. And you were there for Star Wars Day. And I was there as well. I was wearing my Star Wars Blue Jays hat. Yes. And I saw you and I was super excited. So I was like, I get to meet Chris. I like Hadfield. Like, this is amazing. I've never met an astronaut before. And he's Canadian. It's literally like my back door, my backyard, I should say. So I went to go line up, and
there were a lot of people there.
There was a lot of people. Yeah. I was literally like, the lineup was around the dome. So yeah. If I lined up, I would have missed the game. So I didn't. I'll call it a drive-by, look by at you. And that was good enough for me for that evening. And now I'm here and I get to speak with you. So it's very surreal.
I'm sorry we didn't meet. Hopefully that was May the 4th, if it was Star Wars Day. But, I believe, yeah. I'm glad to have a chance to meet you in person. And having a lot of people line up to meet me is a blessing, but it's also a bit of a curse. But thank you for your renewed patience and tenacity so that we can talk today.
100%. And well, you're the rock star. You're a rock star of the astronaut world in the Canadian space, 100%. So I'm just glad that you're here with me today. Okay. So I want to start off really, really easy. Let's talk a little bit about your childhood. Let's talk about, I believe you first wanted to become an astronaut, and maybe I'm wrong if I read this, but it was on Stag Island. You kind of came to that, life epiphany that you wanted to be an astronaut. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and how, were your parents supportive? Were you happy? Were they giving you guidance? I believe your father was a pilot. So talk to me a little bit about that.
I'm on Stag Island right now.
I was just going to ask you.
Is the same place. My parents bought an old cottage here back when I was just learning to walk. And so pretty much my entire life has been summers on Stag Island, although my wife and I have lived all around the world. So there were a bunch of summers we missed. But my wife and I bought a cottage here I don't know, about 20 years ago. And so I love it here. It's just, especially obviously during a pandemic, being on an island is a lucky place to have to go to.
But when I was a kid, I grew up on a farm near Milton, but then in the summers we'd go to Stag Island, and all through the year there was some pretty cool stuff going on, like Star Trek on TV, and Lost in Space, and stuff like that. And then 2001: A Space Odyssey, that movie, Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick, and then I'd been reading science fiction stories, and it all just had captured my imagination. But strangely, now it seems obvious, but strangely, my weird science fiction imaginings were being underpinned by the reality of the space race, going to the moon. And right about the time I was really starting to become aware of the world, 8, 9, 10 years old, is when first Apollo 8 went around the moon at the Christmas of 68, and then Apollo 10 just about landed on the moon. And then in the summer of 69, Apollo 11 landed on the moon. And to this little boy here on Stag Island, that was like, holy cow, magic is real. This is a real thing that actual people are doing. And I thought, if those three guys are doing it, if Neil and Buzz and Mike are doing it, then, what's to stop me apart from myself? And just because Canada doesn't have a space agency or astronauts or rockets, they didn't have any of those things in the United States, a decade previously either. So,
right.
So I knew things were going to change. And so I started changing myself, because I knew that's the biggest change that had to happen, was to turn myself into an astronaut. And amazingly enough, I got selected, and I've flown in space 3 times and done spacewalks and commanded a spaceship. So it's amazing where a little boy on Stag Island's dreams can end up.
Yeah, it's honestly unbelievable. I would say, can you walk us through some milestones that you had to get to, and get through to be able to be an astronaut, and especially in Canada, because there's not many Canadian astronauts. You do have to work with NASA. We do have wonderful programs, but, we are connected to NASA in different ways. So can you, if somebody wanted to be an astronaut, where would they start? What would they have to do? And what was those kind of milestones that you you had to do?
At the time when I decided to be a Canadian astronaut, it wasn't hard. It was as if I was going to be, hey, I want to be Captain Kirk. It's just an imaginary thing. Canada didn't have the necessary structure or will or history in order to have a Canadian astronaut. So when you ask what things had to change or what steps had to be taken, one of them was something I had absolutely no control over, and that was for Canada to decide that they wanted to get into the human space program. And I even considered, as a young teenager, we have some relatives who are American living in the States, and I thought, well, maybe my best bet here is just to go live with them and work on getting my American citizenship and try and become an American to get into NASA. But I'm Canadian, and that was such a long shot. What are the odds? It's terrible. And so I didn't want to give up something that I already had and cherished in pursuit of something that was probably never going to happen. So I thought, okay, Canada might get into it. There's a pretty good shot, but I'm going to do the stuff that I think is important. And that was the hard thing to decide. What's important when you want to become an astronaut? So I looked to the existing cosmonauts, Yuri Gagarin and Alexei Leonov and Valentina Tereshkova, and looked at their qualifications. And then the Americans, the original 7 Mercury guys, and then all the people that were now getting ready or in the process of going to the moon. And they all had an advanced university education. So, okay, great. I'm going to university. I'm going to study something technical. That suits me anyway. They all fly spaceships, and, flying's a verb. So it's like, okay, if it's a verb, I can learn how to do that. How do I learn to fly? And as you mentioned at the outset, my dad's a pilot. He's 87 now. He still flies his little old airplanes around. But as a teenager with no money, how do you become a pilot? Well, there are programs. In the United States, there's a Civil Air Patrol and other organizations. In Canada, there's the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. So I joined the Royal Canadian Air Cadets, and I worked really hard and qualified. And the summer that I was 15, I got chosen and trained and qualified to be a glider pilot. So I had my glider pilot's license before I had my, car driving license. And then the next summer, again, I competed and got selected and trained and qualified and became a powered airplane pilot. So there I am now with a pilot's license. And But astronauts do a lot of other stuff, and they train underwater. So I learned to be a scuba diver, and they keep their bodies healthy because you got to fit in your spacesuit. So try and keep my body healthy and keep studying and learn other languages, and then in 1983, 84. The Canadian government had an astronaut recruitment. We didn't have a space agency yet, but NASA invited a Canadian or two to fly on the space shuttle. And so there was a big scramble in Canada, the National Research Council and others. They had a recruitment. They hired 6 astronauts. I wasn't ready, but I watched that happen. And that was a huge threshold to see it was like the door was now kicked open, and it was going to stay open. So I thought, all right, I really need to focus. I didn't even have a master's degree yet. And I was just training as a young jet pilot at the time. But I kept on working at it. And I thought most of the astronauts like me, the ones from an engineering background, I'm not a doctor and I'm not a physicist, they're also test pilots, which is a whole different education. So, and it fascinated me. So I had to get selected for test pilot school, and Canada trains like 1 test pilot a year for the country. So I got selected to go to test pilot school with the U.S. Air Force down in California, up in the Mojave Desert, where Chuck Yeager broke the speed of sound. And so I graduated out of test pilot school, and then I got on an exchange tour. I was a test pilot with the U.S. Navy as a Canadian down over the Chesapeake Bay, just south of Washington, D.C. Wow. And I finished a master's degree at the University of Tennessee. And when all of that was just sort of at its peak of, my own successes and accomplishments, Canada formed a space agency, and they recruited a new class of astronauts. And so I stuck my hand up as high as I could, and they had 5,300 something people applied, but they chose 4 of us, and I was one of them. And I got sent right down to Houston, Texas, in the summer of '92, and I just couldn't believe it. That little kid on Stag Island had gotten a phone call from the head of the Canadian Space Agency saying, "Do you want to be an astronaut?" And I said, yes.
Wow. To be honest, like there's all those things that you have to go through, from timing to, working on your craft and doing well in your craft and all of it. And then it coming together like that. It's unbelievable, because you don't really get those opportunities all the time. And it was just,
I never counted on it at all. And I always expected it to, I never actually seriously thought I would fly in space until in November of 1995, when the engine shut off and we were weightless. That's the first time I really let myself believe that I would fly in space, because there's so many uncontrollable unknowns and the probability is so low. I always had it as my goal, and it helped shape all my decision making, but it was never a must-have, nor was it ever my only measure of success. I've loved all the stuff I've done. I was an engineer, and I was a downhill ski racer at a low level for a while, and I was a pilot, and then a fighter pilot, and then a test pilot, and I would have loved doing any of those things for a career. But I was just so lucky that, as you say, the timing worked out. All the dominoes lined up, and I got picked, and then flew in space.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, and it's a great story. It's a great success story. And I love that those milestones weren't just be like, I need to be an astronaut. There's many other things that you look and measure success too. So I want to go into the space race now. John F. Kennedy said that the space race was something as a unifier, that he saw it, in the end of it, he found it maybe to be a unifier of nations. What are your thoughts on the modern day space race compared to now in the end? Is there some negatives? Are there positives? Like where do you see, and to be honest, I don't know many people know if we have a space race going on. Maybe they do or don't. From what I see, it's a combination of both. So what's your thoughts on the modern day space race? And do you think we're going in a positive way with this?
I don't know of anything in the world that doesn't have a positive and a negative side. Sharpest blade in the world on a knife. That's, birthday cake, delicious, but you don't want to live on cake. And space races, any sort of race really has a positive and a negative, but by its very nature, races tend to bring out peak performance. Having a measurable destination and a time limit, things like that. That's why we have Olympic Games, right? It's why we have the X Prize. It's why we do a lot of different human motivations is because of there's some sort of goal in mind with a timeline and where personal performance matters. So that's a real positive side to a space race. And there was a weird juxtaposition of things in the 60s that got Neil and then Buzz and then the other 10 people that walked on the moon that got them to the moon, and a lot of it was bad. It was a manifestation of the Cold War. It was a demonstration of the aerospace capability. It was an attempt to break the financial back of the Soviet Union. And it probably never would have happened, to be blunt, if Kennedy hadn't been assassinated. But that gave a national imperative to it that then survived 2 subsequent administrations and still got Apollos 11 through 17 onto the surface of the moon. So, it's a complicated thing, but at the same time, it allowed us to do something that is one of the great technological achievements of all time. What's going on right now is the technology has gotten a lot better. And it's opened up all new possibilities. If you can drop the cost of something by 10 times or 100 times, if a ticket that used to cost you $1,000, well, I don't know where you want to go in the world when the pandemic's over, but let's say $1,000 to go to, I don't know, the Taj Mahal. If that ticket cost you $10, then it would be a lot easier decision to go to the Taj Mahal or Antarctica or whatever. So, and that's what's happening in the space race right now. And some of the race is between old industry and new industry, between old technology and new technology. And then some of the races isn't just corporate, but it's international. What are the Indian Space and Research Organization's objectives? What are the Chinese space objectives? What are the American? What are the Russian? What are the United Arab Emirates? There are dozens and dozens of countries that have space agencies. Each has their own necessary national obligations and agendas. And so they don't all match up. But at the same time, we've been working and living on the space station. We've been working on it for 30 years, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for 30 years. And nations that are at loggerheads, Russia and the United States, Japan, Germany, and England, you don't have to look very far back in history. And yet they are finding ways to cooperate in pursuit while still maintaining their own national objectives. And the moon now is the next destination, and not just like we did in the 60s and 70s, just to barely get there, but actually to start putting a robotic presence permanently there, and then people permanently there as another place that people live. It's a huge, vast, untapped resource with no life. It's bigger than Africa. And we just scratched the surface in a couple spots. Imagine if we just discovered on Earth a continent bigger than Africa that has no life on it, that is geologically exposed, and now we can get there cheaply. What would we do with a resource like that? And that's what the moon has suddenly become. And in the last couple of years, we've found huge reserves of water on the moon, on the order of 400 billion liters of water, 100 billion US gallons of water. And there's eternal power because of the poles always get solar power. So if you got power and you got water and you have untapped mineral reserves, then that's a whole new reason to have a race, 1849 California gold rush or whatever you want it to be. So yeah, I think we need to temper it. We need to cooperate as much as we can. We at least need to intermingle our objectives like we've done, with the United Nations has the Outer Space Treaty and the Committee for the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space and cooperative agreements and all of that. And those are all a good idea. And just before we get to your next question, I'm also the chair of the board of the Open Lunar Foundation, which is looking at what should the laws be as we settle the moon. Whose laws apply on the moon? What are property rights there? What actual little subset of human culture and law should we establish in an entirely new orbital body of the moon? We have a choice. So it's a really good time to be thinking about it. And I've been with the Open Lunar Foundation for several years as we're influencing businesses and governments and the United Nations. We're working with all of them to really think carefully about that question. How should this race play out? And how much control control can we put into it so that we have the outcome that benefits as many people as possible?
You're answering majority of my questions. We're going to be done here soon. No, just joking.
There's lots to talk about.
Well, no, and it's fascinating. I'm like, it honestly is. And for me, the one thing I'm curious too, and I'm going to lead into, we're talking about different nations. So how is China's National Space Agency? How do they work in peace with NASA and the European Space Agency? How do you work with administrations that are at odds with each other? And how is technology that equalizer, if it is? And why is technology that equalizer? Because I find it really funny. I shouldn't say funny. I find it interesting that we have agencies that are working together, but they're at odds immensely and doing things like grabbing satellites and satellite killers. But there's things happening, but we're working together to gain more technology. So how is technology that equalizer, and how do they work together?
In the 1980s, I was a fighter pilot, and I would get scrambled. I would race out to my jet, had to be airborne in 12 minutes. I would be in an F-18 racing to the East Coast, a fully armed F-18 with missiles and bullets in it, to intercept an armed Soviet bomber that was practicing hostile cruise missile launch profiles on North America. That's what I was doing right up until the late 1980s. Right. And yet in 1995, I flew on an American space shuttle using the big Canadian robot arm, Canadarm, to build part of the Russian space station Mir that was started during the Soviet regime. So things change, and politics is an extremely slippery, flexible thing, and national objectives shift, and alliances come and go. I mean, the Soviet Union, if you look back to the Second World War compared to what they were in the Cold War or what they are right now, the relationship with other countries has radically changed over time. So there's no reason at all to think that that's about to stop. Right. And the enemy of your enemy is your friend, obviously, as has been said for a long time. And when you talk about technology, I think what's really being said is overcoming complexity. If something is way too hard for you to do it, Chrissy, then you might ask the person in the house next to you to help you, even though just the day prior you had an argument about your dog, crapping in their flowers or something. It's like, yeah, okay, we're having some disputes over some issues, but at the same time, this is beyond my capability, and it might be good for both of us. How about if we cooperate on this issue? And what we found on the International Space Station is that cooperation can be both self-perpetuating and to some degree contagious. And maybe the last piece is there is no nation in the world that is a monolith. Even North Korea has lots of subtleties and complexities. Something the size of Russia, I mean, it's not like every little subdepartment of the governing organizations of Russia agree with each other. And China, that's obviously true as well. And that's true in the United States. It's true everywhere. So even within China, the military side of space launches an anti-satellite weapon, and the civilian and scientific side of space is shocked and aghast. And same thing happens in India, and the same thing happens in the United States. So there are those internal disagreements. And so when you're looking to cooperate, it's never going to be 100%. Even internally within one country, in between the Marshall Space Flight Center and the Johnson Space Center. Right. Even those two NASA organizations are banging heads over budget and objectives and things. So that's normal. That's just human interplay. I think the key is to find either tasks that are too hard for one organization or one country or one whatever to solve on their own. So that just begs cooperation, or areas where you're naturally aligned already, like who is going to clean up orbital debris, or what are the laws going to be for property rights on the moon, and how can we start working on those? And we kind of, a lot of the technology, we need to solve it together and take advantage from each other's brilliance where we can. And the scientists want to cooperate with each other. Obviously, they want to get their paper published, and I'll get all the grants and all that. But at the same time, it's a very collegial community on Earth. So I think we need to look for every opportunity we can, in amongst everybody's agendas, to find reasons to cooperate. And it's hard to find a better example than the International Space Station, which was first conceived in the 80s, started being built in the 90s. People started living there over 20 years ago. And we have 7 people from multiple countries up there living and working in harmony, all the time right now. And that's going to last, at least another decade. So it's a pretty fine example of what other space programs could at least learn some lessons from.
Yeah, we should probably look to space and people working together in those administrations to learn how maybe we can work together in our own and politically in other places as well. It's a great example of it. We're going to head to Mars now. So I'm going to talk about the United Nations Outer Space Treaty as well. So if we're having all of these issues on Earth, from climate change to even just our internal disputes that we have within countries, how do we not take those issues to Mars with us? What is the treaty doing to help have an understanding once we get there? Because to be honest, when you kind of get there, isn't it kind of like, oh, well, we're here now and we own it. Like, are we going to colonize the same way that we've done Earth? And will those rules really apply? Like, will the treaty really apply? Will people actually follow it?
I don't know one perfect person, not even close. I know myself better than everyone, and I know all of my flaws and foibles and shortcomings. And just through observation and conversation, everyone else is, the same sort of thing. So it's not like getting to a new place is now going to radically change human behavior, And I think the reason we left Africa 70,000 years ago, or whenever it was, the first of us to have the gumption to start exploring the rest of the world, it was probably an irritated teenager who just couldn't stand their parents anymore, and they just had to get over that next hill and go somewhere else. It was probably human conflict that drove us to explore so much of the world. And there's no place on the world that we have settled where everything's been perfect. Utopia is a fine goal, but with imperfect humanity, I think we need to build structures that protect us from our lesser selves, from our bigger evils. And that's why we have laws. And that's why, the oldest profession or second oldest profession is a lawyer. And some of the oldest written documents that exist are legal contracts, from 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Because in order to build a structure of stability with society where humans can advance, we have to be able to protect ourselves when we're misbehaving. And that's why we have police forces, and why we have militaries, and why we have stop signs and all the other regulations that we put on top of ourselves so that we behave ourselves. That's also going to be needed when we get above the atmosphere. And on the International Space Station, we do not follow any one particular country's laws. We have the International Crew Code of Conduct. That's what we live by on the space station. And all the 15 nations hammered it out. These are the rules the astronauts, cosmonauts live by on the space station. And when we get to the moon permanently and get to Mars, in the future with people, we're going to have some current day version of the last 300,000 years of human thought and development as to what rules we all choose to live by. The Outer Space Treaty was drawn up in the 60s because suddenly we were going to get to the moon and we needed some sort of plan, and the United Nations took it upon themselves. And it's a pretty good document, but it's vague. It's a good groundwork, and it was designed really to avoid nuclear proliferation in Earth orbit and beyond. But it's a good document, a starting place, but it's not nearly specific enough. But you asked, are we just going to repeat the same mistakes? I mean, Antarctica is a more recent experiment that is very different than any other continent that we've ever settled before. And it's imperfect, and it's got, nationalistic sides to it, but it's also working. And it's very different than, say, China or whatever, or the United States. So it's an example. The law of the sea is another example where, you're not following one particular country's laws, but you're finding some sort of international code of conduct that you can all live by. And we're going to have to further extrapolate all of that to the laws that we're going to live by. And if you're just in the early exploration phase, then it's not so complex. But when the first people start living on the moon, You know,
Right.
when someone has a sleepover for a year, and then and where they start to self-identify as whatever they're going to call themselves, loonies or lunarians or selenians or whatever we choose,
Right. We'll find a good name.
moonlings, I don't know,
Yeah.
moonians, moonies, yeah. But when we do that, they're going to have a big say in that, you know, just like any settlers anywhere. And to come in and assume that everything you're doing is right, and that what exists there already is inconsequential, that's sort of a natural human reaction. You know, it's how a lot of people walk into a room, and it's definitely how Europe walked into North America
Right.
in the 1500s. And it's got some strengths, but it's got some horrific weaknesses, and the genocide and the impacts. I mean, we should have and can do so much better than that. And it's, you know, it's the repercussions of that are still so evident and so unsolved, even here 500 years later. We need to be more deliberate about it. We need to build on the Outer Space Treaty so that we don't just come in with a great sense of self-righteousness and a lack of awareness of what place we're moving into. The moon, though, is 100% lifeless, so it's less of an obligation. We don't necessarily want tourists all tromping around where Apollo 11 landed and, you know, messing up the heritage that we have there. But otherwise, you know, we need to decide on rules. How are we going to use the water? Who gets the good spots for their solar collection satellites? What frequencies are we using? How do we help each other in times of emergency? We've got to work on all those rules. But Mars may have life. Mars has water. Mars has an atmosphere. And 4 billion years ago, when life first, very primitive life, first developed on the Earth, Mars was sort of the same kind of planet, hot and wet with a thick atmosphere, as far as we can tell. And so if you're hot and wet with a thick atmosphere for 1 billion years, well, that's how life started on Earth. So maybe life started on Mars. We can't see any evidence of any sort of complex life on Mars, and definitely not intelligent life. But even still, if there's life there, then we really have to honor that and think about what that means for us, our level of responsibility. How do we do no harm? How do we protect the human species, but at the same time, protect whatever life may exist on Mars? So yeah, and we're going through all that. There's the planetary protection officer at NASA, whose job it is to try and evaluate all of that and make sure that everything we send to Mars is properly sterilized, so that it's not going to inadvertently bring tardigrades and infest Mars. So yeah, we need to think very carefully about it.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you that too, because there's stuff that's happening with Perseverance right now on Mars. How do you inadvertently not bring something, and how do you evaluate that? Do you know how they go about? Because, for example, we might go to a planet and do we assume that it's only based on what we know of human, or do we look at other elements around us that could be potential how life maybe can be formed, and then we base a hypothesis around that? Do you know how they go about kind of evaluating how they're not going to inadvertently bring things to another planet? Because it really could cause some damage.
Yeah, we live within the confines of our own imagination, for sure. And definitely we're constricted by our technology. So if we can't even imagine life to be a certain way, then there's no way we're going to be able to protect against it or against doing it harm, right? We have sort of a precept of what life might look like. And therefore we can try and use everything we can think of in order to keep from doing harm to life like that we might imagine. But if life exists in some other unimaginable form to humans at this point, how could we avoid making those mistakes? We have to go with everything we can imagine, and then take every step we can think of, and then try and do what is the right thing. I mean, that's just the rule for life. We maintain clean rooms really well. I mean, go into an operating room, and that's a pretty bug-free place, so that something doesn't get an infection. Or where we assemble computer chips, beautifully clean room down to the particles are so small that, they're hard to even imagine. And we subject the vehicles that we send to Mars to that type of sterilization and scrutiny to make sure that we are not inadvertently sending something there that is our definition of life. And and we're being extremely scrupulous about it. And so I think we're taking the precautions that we should. But that doesn't mean that we're going to always, or that everyone's going to follow by those rules. We have to try and be self-policing. We have to try and impose it on each other. Everybody knows that pollution is bad, but everybody throws stuff away every day and sort of hopes it goes into some sort of landfill and they don't have to think about it anymore. People become quite self-absorbed and don't think too much about consequence. It's sort of human nature. So that's where we need regulatory bodies and external watchdogs and rules that we can't break and international agreements. And it's the only way to keep ourselves protected from ourselves in order to accomplish the things that we really want to do long term. And the agencies that are involved are working really hard on it. I think the United Nations Outer Space Treaty and the committees that are working to try and expand and support that, they're working really hard on this issue as well. But the reality is we need to address it every single time, and we need to keep it top of mind, and we can't just stop doing it until we know for sure what's actually going on Mars. We've done the exploration, and then we know what levels more specifically we need to take in order to protect what's there and still accomplish objectives for the human race.
Do you think we're actually going to do that, though? Do you feel that that's something that are we going to stick to what we're planning? Do you think it's going to be successful?
Well, we've done an excellent job so far. We've been going to Mars since the 70s. It's a long time. Yeah. In human, we only flew the very first thing ever to space in 57 and the first human in 61, space shuttle in 81 and space station in 2001. So it's still pretty new. But I don't think we're going to suddenly stop being human beings. And I don't think we should. As far as we know, we're the only intelligent life in the universe. And we're looking, there's probably life somewhere else. Intelligent life, I don't know. We haven't found any evidence of it. The odds are enormous that there's life somewhere else, but we have zero proof of it. So we have a huge responsibility to not squander something that is very, very rare in Earth history, and that is an advanced intelligence and awareness of the universe itself. And we can't all just hide under the bed and do nothing. All advancement, all art, all creativity, all human opportunity would stop as well. It's always got to be a balance between human curiosity and human ingenuity and human necessity to explore. You've got to balance that with the responsibility of your own actions. We learned to walk way before we learned to talk. That's human nature. It's human physiology. We have to be able to go touch things and see them and experience them as part of our formative process to just be human. Before anybody ever explains anything to you in a language, you've already learned an enormous amount. And that doesn't cease after we learn a language. We're still very experiential. So I think the real responsibility lies, just like it does right across society, with allowing people to be people, but at the same time building a set of regulations that keeps the worst things from happening. It's like watching hockey. There's all sorts of rules in hockey, but you got to let the players play because it's a hockey game, and that's what it is. You don't want people to get injured. You don't want people to cheat, but you want the game to be able to be played. And you can extrapolate that simple example to any level that you want, and it won't be perfect, but we are putting as many rules as we can in place. We're following them to the best of our ability, and so far in space exploration, we're doing a fantastic job of it. And so I'm pretty optimistic about it, but that doesn't mean we can't stop working on it.
I think that's a very valid point. I think optimism 100% is where you guys have been and what you've done. And there is a progress and there's a positivity that's going forward. And I'm glad that you feel that as way too. Makes me feel good to know that you're positive, that we're going in the right direction. I want to talk a little bit about your 14 days in the sea with your NEEMO. I believe it's the NASA Extreme Environment Mission Operation. That would have set you up, I would imagine, to have the feeling of being on Mars or another planet and being very confined spaces. What did you learn in your own personal behavior that you noticed yourself, along with your performance and your physiology? What did you personally learn about yourself? And then what did you learn about other people when you sat with them in those very small space? Because it wasn't massive. And then how would that apply? I'm assuming that you've thought about Mars and what that would have felt like, you being there and being an astronaut, being the first people to walk on one of the first people to walk on Mars.
One of the ways that the space agencies and the astronauts succeed is through simulation and practice and accurate role playing and very, very technical role playing, so that everyone learns what it's going to be like. And part of it is just nuts and bolts and machinery. How does this thing actually work? And can I, how do I fly a rocket through the atmosphere? So dangerous and so crazy. It all happens so fast. And we trained for years and years and years in order to be able to successfully fly a fairly primitive rocket. But there's also the psychological side. If you're going to go live on a space station for 6 months, where you are physically isolated from the world, completely from the other 7.7 billion people, and you're surrounded by danger, you can hear the meteorites ricocheting off the hull, and you can't ever go outside, and you don't know when you're coming home. How do you psychologically prepare for that, so that you're not just just enduring it or something, but you're actually thriving in that different environment? And so that's another thing that the space agencies simulate, is the psychological environments, so that their crews are well trained and prepared for the reality of where they're heading. And we do all sorts of it. We do leadership training and crew resource management and interpersonal training and survival training in the Arctic and survival training in the desert and survival training in all different Earth environments. But we also live at the bottom of the ocean. And as you mentioned, there's a program at a facility just off the coast of Florida, and the NASA good acronym for it is NEEMO, as in Jules Verne, Captain Nemo, but National Extreme Environment Mission Ops. It's a habitat on the seafloor. And when you go down to that habitat, the air pressure inside is about the same air pressure that's in the tires of your car. High pressure, what it's like to squeeze all that air into the tire and how stiff the rubber is. Well, now you're living in a place like that. It changes the chemistry of your blood, so that you couldn't just pop outside and come up to the surface, because all of that compressed gas would bubble up in your blood and you'd die. You'd get the bends. It would bubble into your head and, cause serious consequences, and you'd probably die. So you are trapped on the seafloor in a obviously it's going to be a small place. It's hard to build things on the seafloor and maintain them with a small group of people for somebody else's purposes. So that's pretty good astronaut training. And we use it to train for not just the technologies and communications, but also the psychology. And while I was, the facility's called Aquarius, while I was on Aquarius, I was the designated commander of our crew. We actually went to Martian operations, meaning that all communication with anybody on Earth had to have a big time lag, just as if we were on Mars. And we, sent a note saying, hey, my laptop hung up. What do I do next? And it takes 12 minutes for the signal to get to Earth, and then an hour for them to think of the solution, and then 12 minutes to send the signal back. We actually lived on Martian protocol while we were there. And I found it really liberating, because the decisions become much more autonomous. You're much more responsible for your own crew and your own future. You have to take responsibility for your actions. You still got this tremendous help desk of Earth available, but it's a help desk, and they can't actually solve your problems real time. And so then you need to build the psychology of your crew to be able to enjoy that type of environment, the separation, to give them daily tasks, an acceptance of the confines of where they are, ways to succeed on a daily basis, ways to celebrate what was happening, so that when people come back from it, they aren't like, man, I endured 2 weeks. They, in fact, they come back and go, that was the coolest 2 weeks of my life. Was that ever cool? Right. And that was my objective as the commander. And and you can manifest that and make it happen a lot of different ways. And that was really good training for me and some of the crew who I actually ended up flying in space with afterwards. I think very good preparatory training for all of them in what it's going to be like living on the space station, but eventually what it's going to be like on the moon and eventually Mars.
Yeah, I can imagine. When I was reading different articles of you experiencing, that NEEMO, it was, to me, I'm like, I'm claustrophobic, so I wouldn't be able to do that. So it's amazing to know that people are actually testing that for us, and then when we're able to go to Mars, we have that ability to have a little bit of an understanding before we get there. I have to do this because we are the Debrief and we do like UFOs where we talk about it in an academic form. So I want to chat with you a little bit about UFOs. Are you a believer in them? And in context, do you know, and I believe that you've said you've seen some stuff in space, but I know that we're not going to get into the alien conversation because that's something that we don't do in the Debrief in that way. We like to talk about the UFOs and the way that they are in academic and things that are happening through the Pentagon right now. So what's your take on the UFO conversation, along with then what's been happening with the Pentagon coming forward and saying that UAPs are real?
Well, let me just say categorically, we have never seen life anywhere but Earth. Categorically. I was an astronaut for 21 years. I'm not beholden to anybody. I'm 100% free citizen. I can say whatever I like. Nobody could ever stop me. And boy, if I had seen life, I would tell everybody. It would be, think how big the budgets would be. Think how important that would be for humanity. I mean, it doesn't make any sense at all that everybody would keep it a secret. How would I keep it a secret anyway? How would the hundreds of people who've flown in space and the tens of thousands of people in the industry around the world for 60 years, it doesn't pass any sort of logic test. You asked me if I believe in it. I don't care at all what someone believes. I mean, you can believe something in 1 second with no effort. It's way harder to understand something than it is to believe it. And to me, that's the real crux of the issue. How much effort are you going to put into understanding something as opposed to just believing it? Do I believe in aliens? It's not a belief system. Like, it's a silly question. Do I believe in the sun? Do I believe in Earth? It's either yes or no. It's binary. So I think from an odds point of view, there are essentially an unlimited number of stars. The number is so big, it's like 1 in 28 zeros at least. It's probably, it's a septillion, but it's probably more than that we can detect. And we know over the last 10 year or 20 years research that every star has planets on average. So there's at least that many planets, probably more. So to think that we're the only planet with life seems kind of arrogant and small-minded. It's like we used to think we were the center of the universe not very long ago. We thought everything revolved around us. Very egocentric. But until you find evidence, it doesn't matter what you believe. We just don't know the answer. So I think UFOs are interesting. If you see something in the sky that is unidentified, I think it's worth trying to figure out what it is. If you're in the military and you see unidentified things in the sky, that's your job, right? If whether you're Army, Navy, or Air Force, is that an enemy? Is that an enemy surveillance vehicle? Is that a drone? What is that? Is that a satellite? And your job is to defend your country. And so you better identify the things that are flying, that are in your airspace. But that doesn't mean they're life from another planet or from another solar system. That doesn't make any sense at all. It's fun, it's entertaining. It's a crossover from entertainment and reality, which is always, very intriguing and alluring. And so I'm curious about it. And there's a lot of buzz right now because everyone's giving it a level of dignity that the Pentagon is blessing it or something. Well, I mean, they've shown a couple heads-up display tapes that have something in them that it's hard to understand what it is that you're looking at. But I mean, I flew with the U.S. Navy as a fighter pilot or as a test pilot, as a right. Fighter pilot, test pilot. I flew for years as a NORAD fighter pilot. And the little stuff that is sort of around in your heads-up display. There's all sorts of visual artifacts, and there's Mylar balloons up there, and there's vehicles being developed by other countries that we don't know about or don't know too much about. Just like the United States, in their black programs up in the closed ranges in the mountains in the Southwest, they've been developing advanced vehicles for a long, long time. The Lockheed Skunk Works, the SR-71 and the U-2 and the stealth fighter and the stealth bomber and all those things. Those were pretty unidentified flying objects for a long time. So I think it all gets sort of blurred how somehow an artifact in a tape of a heads-up display of a fighter aircraft gets morphed into life from another solar system. And that part of it, I think, is a lot of silliness. But there's obviously something there, and us as inquisitive and thoughtful and responsible people ought to try and figure out what it is that we're looking at. And I think that's what the conversation is mostly about, just all the surrounding, exciting, fun noise that naturally, with all of the varieties of human thought and excitement, go along with that.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm glad that you separated when I asked belief, because some people do feel that it is. And I agree with you that those things should be separated. And we need to look at them in a rational point of view and have conversations and be inquisitive and then learn as we go from there. So I'm glad you did answer that. Thank you very much. We are getting to our time. So I want to say thank you, Chris, for joining me. Before we go, though, I would love to talk to you a little bit about your book. When is that coming out? And can you give us a little maybe synopsis about it?
Yeah, my new book, there's one of them in the world right now, and I'm holding it in my hands. So I'm pretty excited. Awesome. I wrote a thriller novel called The Apollo Murders, and I set it in 1973. And every single word in here came out of this brain. Most of it is sitting at this desk in this room, and it's a really interesting time to have set a book, the spring of '73, because it was Watergate, with the fall of the Nixon administration, and it was the end of the Vietnam War, and the sort of the rise in women's rights and that becoming part of U.S. law. And it was the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, and it was the end of the space race, or at least the Apollo part of the space race. So all of that was happening simultaneously, and the Soviets had a secret space station up that was spying and was armed, called Almaz. And the Soviets had a rover driving around on the moon called Lunokhod that mysteriously malfunctioned in the spring of '73. And the Americans' military had been building a secret spy space station that Nixon canceled for financial reasons. And so there was all of this pressure going on. And so I took all of that reality. And in fact, over half the characters are real people, and almost everything in the book really happened. And I wove a plot of something that just might have been. And I'm really proud of the book. And there's lots of movie companies that have come to us already who've talked about awesome. Getting the rights to the book. And I think a lot of people are going to enjoy reading the Apollo Murders. But right now, it comes out on October 12th. Awesome. You can pre-order it now. You can go to any of the standard book buying sites, or go to chrishadfield.ca/books, and you can order it there. But I think people will enjoy the story. And it also, as someone who's done spacewalks and commanded a spaceship and flown rocket ships and been a fighter pilot and been a combat fighter pilot, it allowed me to tell the story maybe from a position that there are very few other authors who could have.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. And thank you for being rebelliously curious with me today.
That's the best way to look at everything, the world and beyond. Thanks, Chrissy.
Thank you.